From the financial centers of the world, this is Bloomberg Markets with Alex Steele and Guy Johnson.
It is 30 minutes into the U.S. trading day, Wednesday, October 18th. Here are the top market stories that we're following for you at this hour. Biden's historic visit. The U.S. president visits Israel to try and contain the war as an explosion at a hospital in Gaza kills hundreds and Iran calls for an oil embargo against Israel. We are expecting remarks from Biden at any moment. And finding the safety trade, equities trade heavy, bonds mixed, gold up. Goldman says further stock market gains could be at risk if geopolitical risks continue. And Morgan's miss. Shares sink of Morgan Stanley as wealth management revenue misses estimates and net interest income comes in light. From New York, I'm Alex Steele with my co-host in London, Guy Johnson. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. Guy, we are, as I mentioned, awaiting President Biden speaking in Tel Aviv after meeting with victims and survivors of the attack from Hamas a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely, and we will bring you those comments from the president when he speaks in a few minutes' time. We're anticipating that this news conference will start fairly shortly. I think the markets are still looking for clues, Alex, as to how this situation evolves, listening very carefully to the president to try and gauge exactly which lines the U.S. is going to focus on, where we think U.S. policy is going to take us next. But in theory, the continuing presence of the president in Israel probably means that we aren't going to see any ground offensive starting anytime soon. But there are key questions that need to be answered. What happens at the southern border in Gaza? What is happening with the hospital attack or bombing that we've seen? We don't know yet the details surrounding that. Yep. There's so many questions that still need answering, but the market just doesn't have enough answers to move one way or the other.
Yep, and you can really see that reflected in some of the asset prices. Guy and I were speaking earlier, but we don't understand what's up with the bond market. We know that there are structural factors happening, but with the safe haven trade, you're seeing it in the yen, and you're seeing it in the Swiss franc, and you're seeing it in gold, but not so much with the bond market. And it either speaks to other structural factors or just that we just don't know how this is going to evolve. And you're putting different percentages on different probabilities that makes it very difficult as an investor.
Yeah, and in some ways, the Treasury market, which would normally function as that area of safety for the market, is not functioning in the way that we thought that it would. The simple reason for that, there are all kinds of other factors at play here. We're seeing yields going higher. In some ways, that's kind of contrary to what you would naturally expect. But you think about what's happening with the economy, all the strong data that we've had, what's happening with the QT program, all of the commentary we're getting from Fed speakers. All of that means that maybe investors need to look elsewhere for those comments.
Yep. And speaking of comments, we are still awaiting for President Biden in Tel Aviv for his news conference. This is after an historic visit to an active war zone after a hospital explosion in Gaza. He was supposed to be meeting with other leaders of the Arab world. That got canceled after what happened at the hospital. Again, we don't know why that has happened. We don't know who is responsible for that as that sort of tries to work its way out. But we are awaiting a news conference from President Biden. He just wrapped up speaking with some survivors and families of some of the victims as well.
Absolutely. We understand that we have had a 2-minute warning. We are anticipating the president will speak momentarily.
I think this is our second 2-minute warning, so let's see.
It is. The numbers are starting to add up. So let's turn to how the markets are going to perceive all of this. Our question of the day is a fairly straightforward one today as we await President Biden. What is the safety trade here for markets? If the situation does get worse from here, which assets should you be seeking out? Let's try and answer that question right now. Bloomberg's chief global macro reporter, Liz McCormick, joins us, as does JP Barnett, Bloomberg senior global equity markets reporter in Frankfurt. Liz, in some ways, the bond market is not delivering the kind of the safety trade narrative that you would normally have expected at this point. Walk me through the reasons why that's not happening and where else the market can look.
Yeah, I would say that actually the bond market is making sense with the way it's doing things. Long end rates are higher. I think the safety trade for now, really the only pure safety trade in the fixed income or the sovereign market is the very short end. You do see the 2-year yield down slightly. And I think you're going to see more money plow into cash because people are worried. Bonds are down for the year still. We did have a bit of a wave of, buying of all tenor treasuries earlier in the week, but that went away. I think there's too much risk. The retail sales yesterday was strong, which kind of puts risk of higher for longer back on the table. So I just don't think people feel safe, parking their money for a decade or more as a haven trade anymore.
No, fair enough. And there are structural issues, term premium, et cetera. JP, what do you think? What is the safety trade that's evolving in the market right now?
Well, it certainly is. I agree, Liz, it's the short end of the bond market because you don't want to have like big duration risk on your books right now. I mean, the other option that you have is of course, you can always rotate into the more defensive sectors. But should this conflict really evolve into something bigger and more drastic and affect like shipping routes and the oil price going through the roof, then of course, the whole market will go down. What I would say is volatility is still cheap. So if you want to hedge directly your equity exposure, being long volatility is probably not a bad option right now.
As we start to think more broadly than that, though, we're going to get Netflix reporting numbers a little later on, JP. We've got Nestle reporting numbers tomorrow. The technology sector in the US has held up. It appears to be a safe haven right now. It's doing relatively well. Big defensive names like Nestle, in theory, should be an area that you could park your money in as well as a defensive area. Do we think about the Swiss franc? Gold's been on the march a little bit as well, and clearly oil is ticking higher. If we think beyond the front end of the bond market, if we think beyond a money market account, where else could people be looking?
Well, I mean, you named a lot of stuff that makes absolute sense. You want to go into quality names in the equity market that can sustain through a conflict or even like a longer economic downturn should the conflict evolve into that. Of course, the whole market will go down a little bit, but it's one of those areas where you can get your losses back rather quickly. That's one option. I mean, you can always add some defense names if you want to. I mean, it's not like it's a moral question if you wanna do that. That can also work. I mean, gold is an obvious choice. But I guess many people are not too free in how much gold they can add to their portfolio, so it's always a little bit of a tricky trade. Again, I would still argue that you have very cheap volatility in the market. And you can use that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We do want to take you now to Tel Aviv for remarks with U.S. President Biden.
I come to Israel with a single message: you're not alone. You are not alone. As long as the United States stands, and we will stand forever, will not let you ever be alone. Most importantly, I know the recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. More than 1,300 innocent Israelis killed, including at least 31 American citizens by the terrorist group Hamas. Hundreds of young people at a music festival. The festival was for peace, gunned down as they ran for their lives. Scores of innocents, from infants to elderly grandparents, Israelis and Americans, taken hostage. Children slaughtered, babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Rape, beheadings, bodies burned alive. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world. There's no rationalizing it, no excusing it, period. The brutality we saw would have cut deep anywhere in the world, but it cuts deeper here in Israel. October 7th, which was a sacred Jewish holiday, became the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It has brought to the surface painful memories and scars left by millennia of anti-Semitism and the genocide of the Jewish people. The world watched then, it knew, and the world did nothing. We will not stand by and do nothing again. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. To those who are living in limbo, waiting desperately to learn the fate of a loved one, especially to families of the hostages, you're not alone. We're working with partners throughout the region, pursuing every avenue to bring home those who are being held captive by Hamas. I can't speak publicly about all the details, but let me assure you, for me, as the American president, there's no higher priority than the release and safe return of all these hostages. To those who are grieving, a child, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, I know you feel like there's that black hole in the middle of your chest. You feel like you're being sucked into it. The survivor's remorse, the anger, the questions of faith in your soul. Staring at that empty chair, sitting Shiva. The first Sabbath without them. They're the everyday things, the small things that you miss the most. The scent when you open the closet door. The morning coffee you shared together. The bend of his smile, the perfect pitch of her laugh. The giggle of your little boy, the baby. For those who have lost loved ones, this is what I know. They'll never be truly gone. There's something that's never fully lost. Your love for them and their love for you. And I promise you, you'll be walking along some days and say, what would she or he want me to do? You smile when you pass a place that reminds you of them. That's when you know. When a smile comes to your lips before a tear to your eye, that's when you know you're going to fully make it. That's what will give you the fortitude to find light in the darkest hours. When terrorists believed they could bring you down, bend your will, break your resolve. But they never did, and they never will. Instead, we saw incredible stories of heroism and courage, of Israelis taking care of one another, neighbors forming watch groups to protect their kibbutz, opening their homes to shelter survivors, retired soldiers running into danger once again, civilian medics flying across rescue missions, and off-duty medics at the music festival caring for the wounded before becoming a victim himself. Volunteers retrieving bodies of the dead so families could bury their loved ones in accordance with Jewish tradition. Reservists leaving behind their families, their honeymoons, their studies abroad without hesitation, and so much more. The State of Israel was born to be a safe place for the Jewish people of the world. That's why it was born. I've long said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. While it may not feel that way today, Israel must again be a safe place for the Jewish people. And I promise you, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that it will be. 75 years ago, just 11 minutes after its founding, President Harry S. Truman and the United States of America became the first nation to recognize Israel. We've stood by your side ever since. We're going to stand by your side now. My administration was in close touch with your leadership from the first moments of this attack. We're going to make sure you have what you need to protect your people, to defend your nation. For decades, we've ensured Israel's qualitative military edge. And later this week, I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense. We're going to keep Iron Dome fully supplied so it can continue standing sentinel over Israeli skies, saving Israeli lives. We've moved U.S. military assets to the region, including positioning the USS Ford Carrier Strike Group in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the USS Eisenhower on the way to defer further aggression against Israel and to prevent this conflict from spreading. The world will know that Israel is stronger than ever. And my message to any state or any other hostile actor thinking about attacking Israel remains the same as it was a week ago. Don't. Since this terrorist attack took place, we've seen it described as Israel's 9/11. Though for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s. The scale may be different, but I'm sure those horrors have tapped into some kind of primal feeling in Israel, just like it did and felt in the United States. Shock, pain, rage, an all-consuming rage. I understand, and many Americans understand. You can't look at what has happened here to your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, sons, daughters, children, even babies, and not scream out for justice. Justice must be done. But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. I'm the first U.S. president to visit Israel in time of war. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership. There's always cost, but it requires being deliberate. It requires asking very hard questions. It requires clarity about the objectives and an honest assessment about whether the path you're on will achieve those objectives. The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy. The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today, I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. But let me be clear: if Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid. We're working in close cooperation with the government of Egypt, the United Nations, and its agencies like the World Food Program and other partners in the region to get trucks moving across the border as soon as possible. Separately, I ask Israel that the global community demand that the International Red Cross be able to visit hostages. I just demanded that the United States fully supports. Today, I'm also announcing $100 million in new U.S. funding for humanitarian assistance in both Gaza and the West Bank. This money will support more than 1 million displaced and conflict-affected Palestinians, including emergency needs in Gaza. You are a Jewish state. You are a Jewish state, but you're also a democracy. And like the United States, you don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law. And when conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. Israeli, Palestinian, Arab, Jew, Muslim, Christian, everyone. You can't give up what makes you who you are. If you give that up, then the terrorists win, and we can never let them win. You know, Israel's a miracle, a triumph of faith and resolve and resilience over impossible pain and loss. Think about October 7th, the Jewish holiday, where you read about the death of Moses, a tragic story of a profound loss to an entire nation. A death that could have left hopelessness in the hearts of the entire nation. But though Moses died, his memory, his message, his lessons have lived on for generations of the Jewish people as well as many others. And just as the memory of your loved ones will live on as well. After reading the story of Moses' death, those who observe the holiday began reading the Torah from the very beginning. The story of creation reminds us of two things. First, that when we get knocked down, we get back up again, and we begin anew. And second, when we're faced with tragedy and loss, we must go back to the beginning and remember who we are. We are all human beings, created in the image of God with dignity, humanity, and purpose. In the darkness to be the light unto the world is what we're about. You inspire hope and light for so many around the world. That's what the terrorists seek to destroy. That's what they seek to destroy. Because they live in darkness, but not you, not Israel. Nations of conscience like the United States and Israel are not measured solely by the example or power. We're measured by the power of our example. That's why, as hard as it is, we must keep pursuing peace. We must keep pursuing a path so that Israel and the Palestinian people can both live safely, in security, in dignity, and in peace. For me, that means a two-state solution. We must keep working for Israel's greater integration with its neighbors. These attacks have only strengthened my commitment and determination and my will to get that done. I'm here to tell you the terrorists will not win. Freedom will win. So let me end where I began. Israel, you're not alone. The United States stands with you. I told the story before, and I'll tell it again, of my first meeting with an Israeli prime minister 50 years ago as a young senator. I was sitting across from Golda Meir at her desk in her office. And she had a guy who later became prime minister, sitting next to me, just before the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And she flipped the maps up and down, telling me how bad things were and how terrible they were. All of a sudden, she looked at me and she said, "Would you like a photograph?" I looked at her. She got up from her desk and walked out into that hallway. I think it's marble flooring. Walked out in the hallway. We walked out and there were a bunch of photographers standing in front of us. We were standing shoulder to shoulder. Without her looking at me, she said to me, knowing I'd hear her, "Why do you look so worried, Senator Biden?" And I said, "Worried? Like, of course I'm worried." And she looked at me and she didn't look. She said, "Don't worry, Senator. We Israelis have a secret weapon. We have nowhere else to go." Well, today, I say to all of Israel, the United States isn't going anywhere either. We're going to stand with you. We'll walk beside you in those dark days. And we'll walk beside you in the good days to come. And they will come. As you say in Hebrew, which I'm not going to attempt to do because I'm such a terrible linguist, I'll say it in English. The people of Israel live. The people of Israel live. Israel will be safe, secure, Jewish, and democratic state today, tomorrow, and forever. May God protect all those who work for peace. God save those who are still in harm's way. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, what is your red line that would prompt U.S. military involvement in this war?
Mr. President, your team said you have tough questions. You've been listening to President Biden speaking in Tel Aviv right there, not taking any questions. A clearly, deeply affected President Biden stating very clearly that the U.S. stands with Israel, that they will not allow, that they very strongly said do not attack Israel in this moment, and then also led on not being consumed by rage and drawing a parallel to 9/11 in the U.S. and drawing a parallel to mistakes that were made because of that rage, and then moving towards helping the Palestinian people. Guy, that was a very sensitive and tricky line that he seemed to be trying to draw. But he did announce that Israel has agreed that aid can now move from Egypt to Gaza.
Yep. He's making it very clear that he is behind Israel. The American people are behind Israel. The American power that exists in the Mediterranean is behind Israel. They have full support. But he's trying to make clear that that support is kind of important, but also Israel's reaction is important here as well. He's trying to make it clear that they are standing shoulder to shoulder, but he wants Israel to make sure that it acts as a democracy. It acts in its own best interests. It acts in a way that is commensurate with its standing and America's belief in Israel. And I think that's a really tricky line to walk for President Biden. He's making it clear that he wants to see assistance coming across the border. But at the same time, he is going to provide significant and almost immeasurable support. We don't know yet how big the package is going to be for Israel. So it's a very delicate line that he's walking right now.
Yeah, and at the end, he did say that he was still going to be working towards a two-state solution. We want to go now to Oliver Crook. He is on the ground. He was in the room for the president's comments just moments ago. Oliver, what is the reaction on the ground right now?
So listen, there were a lot of questions shouted at the end because I think there are still a lot of many unanswered questions. But really the highlights of this speech, for me at least, from what we heard from President Biden, one was one thing that we were sort of expected to hear, which is the unflinching support for Israel. He gave a little bit of more detail of what that would look like. He talked about putting a package through Congress. He talked about replenishing Iron Dome. He talked about the aircraft group, the 2 aircraft groups that are headed to the Eastern Mediterranean as a form of deterrence for any other actors to get involved. And he reiterated the message that we've heard from U.S. officials the entire time, which on terms of deterrence and others, people getting involved, don't. He said don't 3 times. And then what I thought was also interesting is the reference that he made to 9/11. He said that a lot of decisions were made after 9/11 to try to bring justice, but a lot of mistakes were made. So this is sort of Biden sort of in a tacit sort of warning about how Israel should go about this, and that there should be clarity in their objectives, and there need to be able to appraise whether or not the path they're on is actually achieving those objectives. And as you mentioned, Alex, I think another significant portion of this was at the end, the mention of the two-state solution, and also better integrating with neighbors, a process that was really underway until it was broken asunder last Saturday.
Ollie, let's talk about what happens next. Originally, we would have seen the president going to Jordan. That is now not happening. How does he manage this situation in Israel now if he's only able to talk to one side? What progress can be made? What can Biden do to deliver on what I think he wants to see here, which is a solution that doesn't involve significant escalation, that doesn't involve significant loss of life within Gaza, that involves some aid and assistance coming in, but also Israel being protected at the same time from further attacks? How does the president take another step forward? He's taken a step into Israel. How does he now take another step forward to achieving those goals?
So that is the great challenge here, Guy. Obviously, that explosion at the hospital last night really changed the entire nature of this trip and what Biden could really hope to achieve here. And you have to ask the question, as you have done, Guy, what can you achieve from the hotel in Tel Aviv without speaking to the other side of this table? So what we got from this press conference that perhaps answers part of that question is the question of aid. We know that there are literally hundreds of tons of aid sitting on the border with Gaza in Egypt, trying to cross over to Rafah. And what he said is that he spoke to the Israeli cabinet and asked them to allow aid in, and they said apparently that they would be creating the conditions to do that. But that is something that we've heard from the Israeli side since yesterday, and as of today, that aid is still not moving. And in terms of what he can do, I think that puts something of a limit to it. The question is, will there be able to be a dialogue that's reopened, particularly in the face of evidence that Biden says proves that the Israelis did not drop that bomb or that explosion that happened in the hospital, which again is a very still something of an open question and still a lot of finger pointing going on.
Yep, Oliver, we appreciate it. Thank you very much for that update there. Oliver Crook joining us from Tel Aviv. So if you're an investor and you're listening to that speech, what do you do? The markets don't seem to be that concerned. It felt like there was a lot of emphasis being put on President Biden's ability to move diplomacy in the Middle East. That was really thrown away last night. So what do you do when you're looking at this kind of instability? Charlie McElligott is Nomura Managing Director for Cross Asset Strategy. He's the guy who sends out the notes every day that gives you all the jargon about gamma and shorting and skew that you really need to know, because that's the underlying workings of a market, particularly in a time like today. Charlie, how should an investor be looking at stuff right now?
It's good to be back, Alex. Thank you for having me. Look, in a world where trend inflation is over 2.5%, that creates a condition where bond and stock correlation is positive, which means that bonds don't work as a hedge anymore. That's been the case for 2+ years. So for me, and what, particularly in the volatility world that I live within, I want to own convex instruments. In this case, if I'm looking to hedge, and that is something right in my sweet spot, which is VIX, right? It's VIX is the square root of variance, meaning it's not linear. So this has been a trend well before the Israeli conflict, where people are looking for asymmetric payouts into tail scenarios, low probability scenarios, this being one of them. So the VIX space is where I want to be and where we've seen a ton of activity in recent days because it outperforms in this kind of taily, wingy scenario that we're currently sitting in, looking at this potential for escalation into a bigger situation.
Charlie, in terms of how far through that process we are, we're kind of a week in, we're trying to figure out what's happening, we're trying to understand the implications of all of this. How much has been priced in thus far? How much more is protection still cheap at this point? Is it still good value at this point? Is there still an opportunity to move into that space?
So, you've seen pretty rational, knee-jerky types of trades and, crude oil upside. The biggest strikes right now in December crude futures options is, the December 115 call. I want to say kind of spot crude is somewhere in the low 90s right now. So that's a real substantial kind of, upside crash hedge. Similar with gold, classic, risk off. You've seen a lot of upside trade there. The thing about VIX is that even though it has moved off of a very low base level, there still is some value there. And if I'm looking at this from a client perspective where, yeah, it might be expensive, more expensive now to own an outright call, maybe then what I do is look at call spreads where, the call skew, kind of the richness of a deep out of the money call that I could sell, then helps fund the purchase of one that's closer to at the money. That's the kind of trade that I'm looking at. So, a November 25-35 VIX call spread is actually pretty cheap in the scheme of things. You could do a 22-32 call spread. And in that case, I'm making a bet that if volatility does pick up, it's going to sit somewhere in that sweet spot where I'm not going to get crushed. It would really need to be a disaster event to see VIX trade through the strike that I sold, the 32 or the 35. You would really need to see, almost a larger economic shock off the back of just simply maybe an escalation, however. An escalation where Iran does get dragged into this, Gaza invasion begins, we have the conditions, because the other point that I want to make about VIX, it's really hard to hedge. And from a regulatory capital perspective, it's hard for dealers who are short these calls to clients who are looking to hedge. It's hard for them to recycle that risk. So there still is some squeeze out there in these products.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because there are the couple probabilities that it feels like investors are trying to play out, right? And sort of the proxy war versus a true spread of escalation being two of them. So if you wind up selling a lot of calls, right, and then to your point, how do you hedge it? And if things don't happen, if the VIX doesn't go that way, then you have to kind of buy back everything, which creates that swing in the market that can leave you offside. Yeah,
I mean, that's why instead of, the good thing about just spending premium, just owning an option, just owning a call and not being short an option is that, ultimately you can sleep at night because you're just lighting your money on fire that you paid for that option. The idea that you're going to sell a higher strike to fund maybe a strike that's more expensive that you're buying, is the danger zone. So you got to, figure out what strikes you think are, the sweet spot. We've been pushing VIX call strikes since the summer, I would say, more with regards to, central bank policy, financial conditions tightening, this belief that the higher and tighter financial conditions go, the more it increases the certainty that you get a harder landing. In this case now, this is a real idiosyncratic shock. This is a real potential where, say, if this does escalate, where you do get a crude energy shock, where inflation picks back up because energy prices go, it's probably more of a trade where you just want to own the outright call.
Charlie, what kind of yield would I be expecting here? How much money could I be making? I'm looking at cash at 5%, and I'm thinking this seems very uncomplicated. I can step away from the market, I can put money into cash, I get 5% in a money market account, I'm right at the front end of the curve. Isn't that the safest place to be if I'm looking to hedge risk right now?
I mean, it's remarkable. It really matters, like, the time horizon that you're looking at here. Without a doubt, the story of the past year has been the return of cash as an asset class. In this case, it allows you to sleep at night without the, the undulations of a market that's now suffering under the stress of the lagging variable tightening, policy volatility, economic data volatility, and now geopolitics. In this case, you're now looking at a tricky spot where earlier, just a few months ago, when the market was really rallying, equities were rallying, we were hitting this kind of Goldilocks type of economic condition, and the Fed was also indicating that they weren't really comfortable adding any more hikes forward, with regards to the terminal rate assumptions. You kind of had this sweet spot where people were not actually satisfied with just cash, where instead, year to date, options selling strategies, so premium income funds, have seen $22 billion of asset under management growth year to date alone, where it's kind of like cash plus, where you're getting that additional yield pickup from selling calls on equities index. You're still capturing the underlying equities rally. You're limiting some of your ultimate upside, but it's almost like the new fixed income where you can push into double-digit types of yields. In this case, too, the other thing that I would say, this isn't the classic kind of Volmageddon setup, right? You're not shorting crash tails. 98% of these products are selling calls. So you're limiting your upside, but it's just really contributing to this dynamic where a lot of outsiders would say, look at all this stuff going on in the world. How is volatility so low? Well, this is a big part of that. That flow is out there, and it's just massive in notional size, selling index volatility. And I don't expect that to stop anytime soon, especially when the underlying market, is 7 stocks making up 82% of the year-to-date return. That dispersion is crushing volatility as well.
Which is why I wanted to get you on, because a lot of things can be misunderstood, particularly when you get these kind of geopolitical headlines. I just want to point out the 10-year Treasury yield. Here's another superlative, rising to the highest level since 2007. I feel like we're going to get that day after day at some point. So game this out for us. So over the next however many, what's your time frame? What's a significant thing that you're looking at? What do you focus most on?
So I always like to say that I'm trying to reverse engineer car accidents and figure out kind of where the crowded narrative is and then what could go wrong. In this case, the point that I made earlier that all of this financial conditions tightening that we've seen over the past 2 months, both from the resilient economic data, we saw that again yesterday with the retail sales beat, plus the Fed de facto hiking in their September meeting where they took up their economic projections last year. That created this high for longer impulse. Dollar higher, real and nominal yields higher, even crude higher for a lot of reasons. That's a drag on the economy. That has created a belief in the market that eventually then the next move is going to be this final cycle slowdown. So the clear trade in the market has been, short companies that are, very interest rate sensitive, leveraged balance sheet, heavy debt to equity ratios, big financing walls coming up in 2024, and long quality cash generators, mega cap tech, secular growth stuff that everybody loves with that AI kicker. The real danger to me is that if instead of that assumed move that we do get that slowing, that if instead the data keeps accelerating. Maybe you spike the football with an energy crisis that gets crude oil going again, and then you get that energy kicker back into our inflation data that actually sees the market have to add back terminal. And that's the issue then that I don't think the market is currently underpricing, I'd say, under like a 10 delta, that makes me nervous. Ultimately, kind of the best case scenario for a lot of folks in the market is to actually see the data slow down. They want to see the data slow down because that's the point where, whether that's inflation data or whether that's growth data, jobs cooling, labor cooling, that you actually can return to that old world of negative bond stock correlation where bonds do work as your hedge, right? And you want to lock in, and you're able to lock in, a bunch of great yield right now, generationally high yield. Fixed income works again as your hedge offset to your equities. You don't want a hard crash landing, but you want the data to slow. That's kind of the sweet spot. That's actually, it sounds like an economic left tail, but data slowing is the only way that this rate sell-off stops at this point. Because there's so many structural issues with deficit spending and supply.
Charlie, so good to talk to you. You're a perfect person to talk to on a day like today. Charlie McElligott of Nomura. We truly appreciate your time. This is Bloomberg. We're We're about an hour plus into the trading session. It is a brutal day out there. Equities getting hit. You have higher yields, particularly in the 10-year, moving up. Abigail's tracking the moves. Abby?
And here's that action, Alex. So over the entire session for the S&P 500 E-mini futures, we're looking at a decline. But around the time of President Biden's comments, initially a little bit of a leg higher and then a leg lower, suggesting also on those oil numbers, the data, the inventories coming in tighter than expected, that there could be some continued inflationary expectations ahead. As Alex was mentioning earlier, that 10-year yield at its highest level since 2007. Let's take a look right across the yield curve over the last week or so, and it's pretty amazing to see this backup of anywhere between 22 to 34 bips right across the curve. That 2-year yield at 5.20, the 10-year yield and the 5-year yield, or the 20-year yield here now above the 2-year yield. So this yield curve that had been so drastically inverted, coming less inverted, steepening to some degree. Some say that that is a sure sign of a recession. In terms of the 2-year yield, it doesn't look, technically at least, technically relative to chart technicals, not bond technicals, it looks like we're going to continue to go higher. This is the 2-year yield in recent months. This area of congestion, it suggests yields are going to break to the higher because of the higher lows. Technically, at this point, the 2-year yield now confirmed for about 570 or so. So it does seem as though these inflationary pressures could continue. In turn, that might just pressure stocks. Let's stay tuned because we do, of course, have lots of volatility and technical breakdowns. Relative to the banks, though, a little bit of a breakdown here, too, or a pretty big breakdown. For Morgan Stanley, last time I looked, the worst day since March of this year. And they beat on the surface, but beneath the surface, investment banking, the asset management business, not so great. And then later this week, we have some of the regionals starting to reports such as Comerica and Key. They are down right now. So a little bit of, downdraft, a little bit of a risk-off, bearish tone on the day, Alex.
Yep, net interest income, wealth management, all that. We'll get to that in a second, too. Thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle, joining us there. All right, earlier this hour, we heard from President Biden, who is in Israel meeting with leaders and relatives of victims.
We're going to make sure we have what you need to protect your people, to defend your nation. For decades, we've ensured Israel's qualitative military edge. And later this week, I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense.
All right, joining us now for more perspective, Hagar Shamali is Greenwich Media strategist, CEO and founder. She was also a former Middle East director at the National Security Council at the White House. Hagar, it's been a long time since we last talked, but we do appreciate you coming on and joining us. You have extensive experience when dealing with policy. There seemed to be a lot of optimism in terms of President Biden's ability to bring solid diplomacy to the Middle East right now. At least that's what it felt like markets were looking at. What would that look like now, in your mind?
Well, his number one goal with his trip was to show this solidarity with Israel, of course. And his audience with that is twofold. On one hand, he's speaking to the domestic Israeli audience and the domestic U.S. audience, but he's also sending a very loud message to nefarious actors in the region like Hezbollah and Iran and militant actors in Syria to not even think about getting involved in this conflict. I mean, he said several times, if you're thinking about it, don't. And that's a very important part. The other part the other goal with his trip is really to focus on humanitarian aid. And that's something that I should highlight is new for the rounds of violence that you've had between Israel and Gaza since 2007. There have been 5 rounds of violence between the two sides. And the U.S. has never really been able to press that hard for humanitarian aid. And the reason they're doing that is because the U.S. is not going to change its policy on Israel's right to defend itself. And so that said, they're trying to limit the tragedy and the attacks on civilians by saying you need to get humanitarian aid in. There needs to be a humanitarian corridor opened with Egypt. And so the U.S. really will have a lot of leverage there on that.
Hagar, good morning. It's Guy. What do you see as the next big evolution in this situation? There's been a kind of expectation that we're going to see Hezbollah being drawn in, ultimately, potentially Iran. Do you think those two outcomes are still likely at this stage? The market's trying to handicap the various kind of permutations of what we're going to get. What do you think are the certainties that we can work with right now? Are there any?
Well, you're definitely going to have clashes and violence that will spill over. That is certain. But I don't expect it to turn into some kind of massive regional war. And the reason for that is that it would end up roping in too many actors. And it's actually not in the interest of a lot of these folks, whether it's on the side of Israel and the United States or the side of Iran and Hezbollah and so on. Hezbollah might try to take advantage of the fact that Israelis military and their resources are focused on Gaza. And for them, that is an opportunity. Since the end of the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, Hezbollah has been preparing for what we used to call in government another showdown. But I don't expect that to happen right now because of President Biden's statement, because there are 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the Mediterranean that are literally sitting there in the event that Israel is attacked further or that other actors intervene. That said, while I don't expect this all-out war, these protests that you're seeing right now in Beirut and in other places are very concerning because they will likely turn violent. And the militaries of these countries are going to respond to them with violence. And so it destabilizes everything. And it makes it very difficult for anybody to leave. In situations like that, the first thing that happens are airports shut down, any kind of transportation shuts down, and that can be a very difficult situation.
Hagar, I'm wondering, with your experience in the Middle East, where is Qatar, where is the UAE, and where are Saudis right now? Because if we want to talk about humanitarian aid, we want to talk about some kind of stability, we need those Arab countries to come to the table to talk, to do something. Where are they right now?
Yes, well, they're quite inconsistent, aren't they? So on one hand, you have a couple countries like the UAE and Bahrain who have normalization deals with Israel, and they benefit enormously from those deals because of security cooperation, because of alignment against Iran, because of a massive boon in trade and technology investment. The trade between the UAE and Israel grew by $20 billion in 1 year. And so they are going to be measured in their response. They can still voice themselves against how Israel is responding, the strikes in Gaza, how the civilians are being struck. They can still voice themselves against that, but I don't expect the normalization deals to be threatened. Saudi Arabia is different. Talks with them are going to be on hold. But again, I don't even expect this violence, as ugly as it's going to get, to unravel those talks. I just expect them to be postponed for the same benefits that the UAE and Bahrain receive from those talks. Qatar is different. Qatar has Hamas leaders that live inside Qatar. In fact, when I was at the Treasury Department and we worked in counter-terrorist financing, we used to complain to the Qataris nonstop for allowing Hamas to fundraise, store and raise and move funds inside Qatar. And so that remained. There were some improvements, but it wasn't completely the case. Even now, there are military leaders there. Qatar will try to position itself as a potential mediator, whether it be with regard to hostages or to an eventual ceasefire. And so that's the unique position in Qatar.
Hagar, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate the analysis and the insight as to what is happening here, what will happen here. Hagar Chemali, Greenwich Media Strategy CEO and founder. What are we going to do next? We're going to turn back to what's happening on Wall Street. Morgan Stanley's shares are under significant pressure. This after the bank reported a profit drop in the third quarter. We'll dig into the details as to what's happening below the surface here. The Wall Street Beat is next. Sonali Basak will be with us. This is Bloomberg.
We are seeing increasing evidence of M&A and underwriting calendars that are building. And while we expect momentum to continue this year, given the fourth quarter has some seasonal considerations, we expect most of the activity to materialize in 2024. The minute you see the Fed indicate they've stopped raising rates, the M&A and underwriting calendar will explode.
That was Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman speaking on the company earnings call in the last hour. So in today's Wall Street Beat, we want to take a look at the stock. I mean, it's down 8% at the disappointing results, and it was really that wealth management that came into question. Bloomberg Sonali Basak has been going through numbers. She was on the call. Sonali, the 8% loss is really unusual for Morgan Stanley on earnings.
It's really unusual to see Morgan Stanley miss, particularly in the wealth management business. This idea that consumers are flocking to cash, given where it's yielding, as well as those geopolitical concerns around the world. So when do they start getting back into markets? That will make a big difference for not just Morgan Stanley, but all of the big asset and wealth managers. We were thinking about just what happened at BlackRock, for example, just a week ago. So you're seeing this across different versions of asset and wealth. I want to pull up a screen here and talk about just how much much that asset and wealth business is important to Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, because while you've had investment banking really slump here, you have had deal-making fees at Morgan Stanley slumps 26%. Meanwhile, that asset and wealth manager has been up 6% in the last quarter. When you look over the year, it's even bigger. So you're actually seeing these gains kind of plateau a little bit. I want to caveat for Goldman Sachs, they had those write-downs tied to commercial real estate and other assets, but if you strip out those mark-to-market losses, the fees were also up. So once you see that ballast starting to wane, then you wonder where you start to make money from. And if you're waiting from investment banking to come back, you have analysts now asking, if you're waiting to see green shoots, it's like these green shoots haven't been watered yet, you have analysts saying on the call. So a lot of questions about where the juice is squeezed from, particularly in a stock like Morgan Stanley, where they had been trading at a more expensive price-to-book ratio leading into this period than all of the other banks except for JP Morgan.
Is there any validity to the argument that Goldman is taking his eye off the ball and worrying about who's going to fill his office next?
It's a great question. It's one that's permeating a lot of Wall Street, and they definitely answer this idea that, you know, they have the troops still working here, but James Gorman would like to get a move on and get the new CEO named so that they can start this transition plan. We knew that this would be quite a while throughout the rest of this year, though it has surprised a number of investors on the street that this has not happened yet, leading to a lot of questions about who the next person would be, what part of the business they come from, and whether some of the troops under them are distracted while they try to figure out who will be leading the business next, and really where favors are to warm to in terms of who might be the next leader of the bank.
Yeah, big transition. We've been waiting for it for a long time, as you say. Could have an unnerving effect in certain parts of the business. Sonali, great stuff. Morgan Stanley under significant pressure today. We'll keep on top of that story and bring you more as it evolves. Let's talk about how markets are evolving in Europe. Volume is strong today. It was strong yesterday. It's strong today. Pay attention to that. It's an interesting signal. Stock 600 down by 1.14% today. The bulk of sectors are in negative territory. Other asset classes that are worth focusing on. Take a look at what's happening with the Swiss franc. It is bid. That is one of the safe havens that people are looking at. We're going to talk about Swiss assets in the next hour. Take a look at what's happening with the UK 5-year. We're up by 14 basis points. Now, we had data earlier on, certainly out of the UK, suggesting maybe that inflation is not coming down as fast as we would have anticipated. Is the Bank of England, is the Fed, is the ECB really done? Maybe not. This is Bloomberg.